All right. So the art of self-compassion, I think this is a great topic to go over, especially for caregivers, because compassion is not something you are unfamiliar with, right? Compassion is pretty much the crux of what you do. It's at the core of what you do every day. If you were not a compassionate person, you probably would not find yourself in a caregiving role. Of course, I'm painting with broad strokes here. I'm sure there are outliers to that, but by and large, most people who are in a caregiving role, they do it because they're a compassionate person and they care about another person, right? So I think that when it comes to self-compassion, I'm not asking you to take anything away from anybody else, right? All I'm asking is that you just reserve a little bit of that compassion for yourself. And as we go through this, I hope you see that self-compassion is not a luxury. It is not an option. It is a necessity. If you want to make caregiving sustainable, I know you want to come out of the other side of it with your well-being intact. Self-compassion practice is something you absolutely have to participate in some form or another. So today I'm going to go over some reasons why self-compassion is good for you, and also some ways that you can incorporate a self-compassion practice into your daily routine. So the agenda today is we're going to talk about the three components of self-compassion. They've actually done studies on this, and if you've been on any of my trainings before, I love to throw the scientific studies into things. So we're going to talk a little bit about the three components of self-compassion. Then we're going to talk about the benefits of self-compassion, which I think some of them are probably pretty evident, but we're going to go over it in a little bit more detail today. And then I'm going to give you some examples of self-compassion exercises to get you started. And I'm going to end with one of my most favorite meditations, which is a metta meditation. It's also known as a loving kindness meditation. So hopefully at the end of this, you feel inspired to try some of these exercises, try some of these meditations, and get you going to where you need to be on the road to again, just portioning out some of that compassion that you freely give to yourself. So we're going to start with this quote. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is not complete. And that is by Jack Kornfield. And I love this quote because I think sometimes when we think of compassion, it is always an output, right? It's something that we're doing for or sharing with or giving to another person or another thing, right? But this quote here, I think, is a great reminder that compassion is not just an output, right? It can be an input as well. And we want complete compassion, right? We can't just continue to give and give and give and not reserve anything for ourselves. So the three components of self-compassion. So self-compassion is a nurturing practice, right? A self-nurturing practice that encompasses three key components. And each of these components are designed to help us to treat ourselves with a little bit more kindness, right? And understanding, especially during challenging times. And if you've been a caregiver for any amount of time, it's not always all challenging, but there's a lot that is very challenging when it comes to caregiving. And so self-compassion, you'll have the opportunity to give it to yourself more often as a caregiver, I think. So the three components of self-compassion are self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And we'll go into those individually a little bit deeper, as well as their counterparts. So self-kindness, of course, will encourage us to treat ourselves with warmth and understanding, because we're often our own harshest critic, right? We can be so mean to ourselves. We'll say things to ourselves we'll never say to another living soul, right? But it's not uncommon for us to have these unkind thoughts just kind of running through our mind and criticizing ourselves a lot more harshly than we criticize other people. And common humanity reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles, right? Everyone faces challenges, everyone feels inadequate from time to time. And knowing that we have that common humanity, we have these common experiences, that can actually help us connect with other people on a deeper level. And finally, mindfulness. So mindfulness allows us to be aware of our emotions without getting overwhelmed by them. Who needs some more of that? I do. And mindfulness can help us to acknowledge our suffering without losing ourselves in it. So mindfulness is just being aware of how we're feeling. without judging ourselves, without criticizing ourselves, without shaming ourselves, just to be aware, right? And so these components together help cultivate that self-compassion. They can help create a nurturing and supportive environment for our own well-being. And when I say environment, I'm not necessarily talking about external environment, right? I'm talking about our internal environment, because how we see things, how we view the world, how we translate the information coming into our brains, that's going to affect the way we feel about things. That's going to affect the way we feel about ourselves and our situation. So these are the three components of self-compassion. Let's dive a little bit deeper into each one. So the first one, self-kindness. So on one side, there's self-kindness, and on the other side is self-judgment. So we're going to go over the contrasting feelings here. So with self-kindness, it's really just about treating yourself with the same warmth and the same empathy that you would offer to a friend in need, a family member, right? Even maybe the person you're taking care of, right? Self-kindness is an invitation to embrace your imperfections and your emotional pain with gentleness instead of criticism, right? We often do tell ourselves how we should feel, what we should be doing, how things should turn out, right? And should just invites shame. And so that can lead to self-criticism, right? So we want to make sure that we're embracing our imperfections with that gentleness and not that criticism. So when you're feeling down, it's really important that we remember that it is perfectly okay to acknowledge that we feel down, right? We don't want to stuff it down. We don't want to ignore it. We don't want to pretend it's not there. We just want to accept it and embrace it without judgment, okay? So by softening our critical self-talk and accepting yourself as you are, you can nurture a more loving relationship with yourself. And I think sometimes we don't realize that we are in relationship with ourselves. And how we treat ourselves is very, very important. Because of course, if we are kind to ourselves, we're more apt to be kinder to other people around us. So the role of self-kindness in self-compassion. So many of us experience that self-criticism that leads to feeling isolated and shamed, right? So if we're criticizing ourselves, obviously shame is going to come right along with that. But isolation can actually happen because we are so hard on ourselves, right? We think, well, we can't do this because we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or we're not funny enough, or whatever the case may be, right? And that can make your world very, very small. But embracing self-kindness can kind of open the door to reducing that self-judgment, and that can empower you to be more vulnerable, and that can help you seek support from others, right? So you see how self-kindness kind of combats that isolation a little bit. So this shift can really be transformative, and it can help you realize that you're not alone in your struggles, right? Everyone faces challenges at times. And by easing self-judgment, we can create a space for growth and for healing. So what are the signs of self-judgment? I think we can all think about, times that we've been more judgmental towards ourselves, but I'm just going to kind of break it down and give it a little bit more clarity here, okay? And what does self-judgment look like? How does it manifest sometimes? Number one, negative self-talk, right? Constantly criticizing or belittling yourself in your thoughts or even out loud, right? Oh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that. I'm clumsy. I'm whatever, right? Perfectionism, right? We all know perfection is a myth. It is not attainable, but we often do find ourselves in kind of these trenches of self criticism because we are perfectionists, right? We're setting unrealistically high standards for ourselves and then feeling disappointed when we don't meet them. I think sometimes our standards for ourselves are way, way, way more unrealistic than they are for other people, right? We think, well, that's okay if you struggle in this area, but I can't, right? It's okay if you make mistakes, but I can't, right? That's that perfectionism. Comparing yourself to other people. So regularly measuring your worth against others, right? That can often lead to feeling inadequate, especially if you're on social media for any amount of time. You can see how what looks like everybody's everyday normal, and it doesn't look like our everyday normal, we can start to feel inadequate, but we know social media is not real, right? People stage things, they script things, they edit things, and so what we're seeing is a finished product. We're not seeing all the edits. We're not seeing that cutting room floor, right? So it can be very easy to kind of get caught in that trap of comparing and feeling inadequate. Fear of failure. So this could mean that you're avoiding challenges or you're avoiding new experiences because you have a deep-seated fear of making mistakes. And this and perfectionism, I think, can kind of work in tandem to work against you in tandem, unfortunately. Overgeneralization. So that is where you take one negative experience or one mistake maybe you made, and then you apply it to your self-worth broadly, right? So maybe you messed up some medication one time, right? Or maybe your loved one fell while you were taking care of them. And then you're going to overgeneralize and say, I never do the right thing. I always mess up. I always make mistakes, right? So you're painting very broad strokes based off of one or two negative experiences or mistakes you may have had. Difficulty accepting compliments. So being dismissive or downplaying positive feedback from others. Oh, they're just trying to be nice, or oh, I'm not all that great compared to other people, right? This can be, again, that's how your self-judgment will manifest. Self-sabotage. So that is where you engage in behaviors that really undermine your own success, undermine your happiness due to feelings of unworthiness. And that can be kind of a really sticky web to untangle sometimes. But again, that's how we judge ourselves. We can sabotage ourselves. Excessive guilt or shame, holding on to past mistakes and feeling that you're defined by them, right? We all make mistakes, right? We say that all the time. We all make mistakes. Yet for some reason, when it comes to forgiving ourselves for those mistakes, it can be very, very difficult to let go of that shame, to let go of that guilt. And so that's the way that we judge ourselves more harshly. Overthinking, so spending excessive time ruminating or having those sticky thoughts just kind of run through your head and thinking about your perceived thought flaws, your perceived mistakes. Avoiding vulnerability. This one was a big one for me. I had to get over, but I think that's kind of par for the course. Our American culture doesn't really reward vulnerability that often. Avoiding vulnerability would be like hesitating to share your true self with other people because you're afraid they're going to judge them. So you can see how if you are constantly criticizing or judging yourself very harshly, it's not that far of a jump to assume that's how everyone else sees you too, right? And so you're going to kind of retreat, you're going to isolate, you're not going to be vulnerable with other people. So recognizing these signs is a great first step towards cultivating a more compassionate and supportive relationship with yourself. Okay. Just realizing, man, sometimes I do avoid vulnerability. Sometimes I do self-sabotage. Sometimes I do compare myself to others too much, right? These are all ways that self-judgment can come up, and that is going to hinder our capacity for sharing kindness with ourselves, right? Feeling kindly towards ourselves. Next is common humanity, and the other side of that is isolation. So we kind of touched on that a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit deeper now. So the concepts of isolation and common humanity, they represent two contrasting experiences in life. So isolation will often refer to a state where you feel disconnected from other people. Maybe you're experiencing a lot of loneliness, alienation, or detachment just from society at large. And that can occur physically, emotionally, or socially, and that can lead to negative mental health outcomes like depression and anxiety. And I know that isolation is one of those things that just kind of is in the makeup of caregiving, because oftentimes, especially if you have a progressive, a loved one who has a progressive diagnosis, your capacity to get outside and be around other people and do things in a social capacity is really, really limited. So I understand that that's part of it. But we just have to be aware, okay, that we're becoming more isolated and how that can affect our ability to be kind to ourselves and be compassionate. So let's see, common humanity, all that really is that we're just acknowledging that everybody has struggles, right? Everybody has challenges, everyone has suffering, everyone has joy, right? And understanding that we can be empathetic to ourselves in the same way that we're empathetic to others, right? Everybody struggles. Everybody has a hard time from every now and again. So when we recognize our common humanity, you can feel that sense of belonging and support, and that'll contrast starkly with that feeling of isolation, right? So the balance between these two concepts, if we explore them, that can really provide a lot of insight into the human experience, right? It can highlight the importance of community, relationships, acknowledging our shared experiences and combating those feelings of isolation, and that promotes mental well-being. But ultimately, fostering connections, recognizing our common humanity, that will help alleviate those burdens of isolation. Okay, if you were participating when I did my boundaries training, this was also part of that, setting boundaries, right? Where we just know, hey, this would be hard for anybody, right? I'm not weird or strange or wrong or defective because I'm struggling, right? I'm not a bad caregiver because this is hard, right? Anybody in your shoes would probably feel the way that you feel. Okay. And so it's that kind of thought process that kind of helps us combat that isolation, right? We can feel that connection. Even just being in spaces like this, right, where we see all these caregivers online, we go through support groups, we see all of our caregivers online. We know we're not the only ones, right? And that in and of itself can help you feel less alone and less isolated. So remember, again, you're not alone in your struggles. Suffering is a part of our shared human experience. Everybody faces difficulties. Everybody makes mistakes, and that will help us feel less alone when we do. Um, so embracing that sense of common humanity will allow you to connect with others on a deeper level, right? Hey, you're like me, I'm like you. And we can affirm that we're all in this together, right? I've had some caregivers where they don't reach out for help until they're at the very, very end of their rope. And just knowing that there's a whole world of people who know exactly what they're going through, who know exactly how they feel. Oh man, that right, and that just alone can alleviate a lot of that stress and a lot of that pressure, knowing that, hey, I'm not alone in this. Okay. So we embrace this concept of common humanity. And that'll highlight the flaws and failures. And those are just integral to being a human being, right? We cannot beat ourselves up for being human. And when we recognize that shared reality, it can diminish that sting of self-criticism, right? That, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. This shouldn't be this hard for me. Yes, it should, and it is, right? And you're not alone in that, okay? So we can be less self-critical when we realize that we're not alone feeling the way we feel. So of course, you can do things like compassion focused therapy to kind of help you with this, or even just joining a support group. Those things can inspire you to share your vulnerabilities, right? And when we share our vulnerabilities with other people, we do foster those connections, and we can start to see our worth a little bit more when we open up to other people. And next, mindfulness. So mindfulness, again, it's one of those things that we hear a lot of. But mindfulness is really just experiencing our experiences without shaming ourselves, right? Without judging ourselves, okay? So the flip side of mindfulness is that over-identification, okay? So mindfulness will empower you to observe your thoughts and feelings with compassion and openness, rather than getting caught in that cycle of rumination or those negative emotions, quote unquote, negative emotions. Mindfulness can guide you toward a balance, right? So gently acknowledging your feelings without allowing them to define you, you can create a vital space for healing and understanding, right? Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm bored. Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm frustrated, whatever it is. But you don't judge yourself for that, right? We don't over-identify with that, right? That means I'm an angry person. I'm a sad person. I'm whatever, right? We're feeling sad. We don't have to be identified as sad. I hope that makes sense, okay? So remember, it's perfectly natural, again, to feel what you feel, but we have to have the strength to not let those feelings overwhelm us. Easier said than done, but of course, we call it a mindfulness practice because anything that requires practice is something, a skill that we build upon. So we're going to kind of stink at it at first, but that doesn't mean it's impossible, right? So the importance of mindfulness. So mindfulness really is the bedrock for cultivating self-kindness and that profound awareness of our shared humanity. So when we nurture a non-judgmental presence with ourselves, we can take a step back from that emotional pain and embrace our experiences with compassion. So this practice deepens our connection to ourselves and to others, and that will foster a powerful sense of unity. So when we think of over-identification, we're going to go over some signs of that. So that way you can maybe kind of just think to yourself, have I ever experienced over-identification? So loss of personal boundaries. Okay, so that is a difficulty separating your emotions and experiences from those of others and feeling what they feel. And a lot of times we define that as empathy. We think, well, empathy is a good thing. We need to be empathetic. And that's very, very true. But I would just invite you to shift maybe from empathy to compassion, where compassion is you are motivated to alleviate the suffering of another person, and empathy is you take ownership of that suffering. Okay, does that make sense? I see you're sad and I want to help you not be sad versus I see you're sad and now I'm sad, right? Now those are my feelings, okay? So that can be a sign of over-identification when we lose those boundaries. Where do I end and you begin, right? Heightened emotional reactions. So experiencing intense emotions that don't necessarily belong to you, that can result in anxiety and distress, right? My loved one is in pain. Of course, that's going to cause you distress, right? Um, but you don't have to take ownership of your loved one's suffering, okay? And you can still address the suffering without it bogging you down to where it's yours, right? Difficulty in objective thinking. So this is where we struggle to maintain a neutral perspective or rational judgment in situations that involve others, okay? And I'm sure you guys can maybe think back some times where maybe you were in panic space, right? Overstressed, and maybe your emotions kind of got the better of you, and that happens, right? We do that all the time. Being aware that that can happen, and not judging ourselves when that happens first and foremost, but also when we notice it happens, then that can be a cue to us to kind of reel it in a little bit and take a more objective, neutral look at what's going on, and then that way we can kind of more realistically address that situation. Let's see. Overcommitment. So this is a big one too, I think, for a lot of caregivers, because you by nature are probably one of those people that's, oh, it never hurts to help. I'm here to help. I'm here to, to unburden somebody else, right? But again, that can get a little tricky when we have a hard time saying no, right? When we don't have the time or the space or the reserves, energetic reserves to do all the things we used to do, it can be hard to say no to those things, especially if the expectations are coming from other people. You've got other relationships, like if you're a parent, you've got your own kids, or if you're a spouse taking care, or you're taking care of your spouse, and maybe all the other things that they used to do are now on your plate. Overcommitment can just kind of be par for the course. So I'm not saying that you say no to everything, obviously, right? It's just realizing when we've maybe taken on too much and being able to say no. Compulsive behavior. So engaging in behaviors aimed at rescuing or fixing someone else's problem, often to the expense of our own well-being, okay? So again, I'm not saying don't help people. Just maybe think a little bit, what is this gonna cost me? You can be a little bit selfish in this space, okay? Don't just compulsively say yes or compulsively try to fix or rescue somebody else, okay? Number 6, neglecting self-care. So putting the needs of other people ahead of your own consistently without looping back around and filling your cup. That's going to lead you to that physical and emotional fatigue, that compassion fatigue, where we're just tired of caring, right? Where we wake up tired, right? So neglecting self-care is a way of is a sign of over-identification, because we're so identified with somebody else and their suffering and their needs that we completely neglect our own. Increased sensitivity. So we can be easily affected by others' emotions or situations, and that can create that sense of overwhelm. Maybe you're starting to struggle in making decisions. So that could be because you're overly influenced by other people's preferences or their feelings. It can be hard for you to make decisions because you're not thinking about your needs or what you want or what you even have the capacity to do. And so you're having a hard time deciding what to do because you're essentially having to deny yourself to get, to make that decision. And again, I know in caregiving, that's just kind of necessary sometimes, but the idea is to do what you have to do when you have to do it, but then turn around and fill your cup, okay? Be compassionate to yourself in the process. So when we recognize that these signs of over-identification, this is going to help us establish those healthier emotional boundaries with other people and with ourselves, and it can promote a more balanced approach to our relationships, okay? And the final component, oh wait, no, sorry, that was the final component. Yep. So what are the benefits of self-compassion? There are many, and of course, this isn't an end-all be-all list of all the benefits of self-compassion, but here's just a few. So self-soothing. So when we embrace self-compassion, we can create a sense of calm within our nervous system. And that can help alleviate feelings of anxiety and stress. So think back to those moments, maybe, where you're having a harder time and you spoke with somebody. Um, and maybe a friend or a family member, they had some kind words for you or reassuring touch, and that made a difference, right? During your tough times, where they extended that soothing compassion to you. You can offer that same warmth and care to yourself, right? So self-compassion is just like receiving kindness from other people. And this has a wonderful effect on our brain where we release oxytocin. And that is a hormone that allows us to feel safe, to feel like we can be tranquil, that we can trust. Okay. So self compassion actually makes us feel more safe. Conversely, self criticism can feel threatening, and that can prompt our bodies to react with that fight, flight, or freeze response, right? It's kind of engaging that part of our nervous system. So, by choosing compassion over judgment, we can gently soothe those overwhelming reactions. Okay. So, if you find yourself in a space um, where you need to give yourself a little bit more compassion, we give ourselves that compassion, we get that oxytocin, right? That makes us feel safe. But if we address those feelings with criticism, we're likely to feel more anxious and more wired for fight or flight. Okay. Nurturing self esteem is the next benefit to self compassion. So, of course, it's natural to seek validation from other people when it comes to our self esteem. But remember, your own kind words can be just as uplifting. Just like our own negative words can tear us down, our positive words can build us up. Okay. So, self compassion is closely tied to positive self talk and extending grace to ourselves for our human mistakes, right? We cannot be beating ourselves up for being human beings. Okay. So when you face a setback, just try to take a step back and see your mistakes as separate from your identity, right? I made a mistake, not I am a mistake. Okay. So this perspective will allow you to see yourself through a more kind lens, right? So instead of thinking I am a failure, just reframe it to I made a mistake, right? Mistakes are part of being human, and this moment does not define who I am. Okay. Another benefit, it can help you embrace life fully. So when we approach our mistakes with compassion, they become less overwhelming, right? And this can free you to enjoy your life a lot more. When we see setbacks as opportunities for growth rather than negative reflections of ourselves, we will often find that greater sense of fulfillment, right? This is a growth process. Okay. We are growing through this entire experience. So when we spend less time dwelling on our perceived flaws, right, we can open up more space for what brings us joy and what connects us with our loved ones. Okay. And this is all just combating that self criticism and replacing it with self compassion. Next, deepening our relationships. So this is not only going to help you with your relationship with yourself, but also the relationships you have outside of yourself. So when we're kinder and more patient with ourselves, of course, we're going to become more kind and more patient with other people. Okay, that's just the way it works. So the benefits of self-compassion, like self-esteem, joy, those allow you to replace or to approach your relationships with optimism and openness, right? Because if you think about it, if you're always in your head, talking smack to yourself, talking about how terrible you are, how you're not good enough, or how you don't measure up, you're going to approach your relationships through that lens. They think I'm not going to measure up. They think I'm not good enough, right? So you're projecting your own self-judgment on other people, and that's going to prevent you from reaching out, right, to being in relationship with other people. What we think about ourselves greatly impacts the way we navigate this world, okay? The next benefit, alleviating anxiety and depression. So it is really heartbreaking to realize how much we are constantly criticizing ourselves, either out loud or into ourselves in our mind. And this affects our mental health in a negative way. Okay. Being harsh on yourself, that again triggers that threat state, right? And that can make us feel anxious. That can make us feel sad. That can make us feel inadequate. But when we learn to show compassion towards our struggles and our mistakes, right? We say, anybody in this situation would feel this way, anybody in this situation would struggle, right? We take those important steps that we need to keep ourselves out of that judgmental state and alleviate that anxiety and even some of that depression that maybe we're experiencing. Another benefit of self compassion, this can help us to find the courage to take risks, okay? So we all understand that taking risks can feel intimidating. You don't have to be a super risky person in your life to be happy. I know that. I'm not a thrill seeker myself. I like to know how everything's going to end up before I start anything. But we can really start to carry a heavy load of self-judgment when we limit ourselves, right? I can't do these things. I'm not good at these things, right? But when we cultivate that, or the fear of disappointing other people, disappointing ourselves, fear of failure, that can be very, very daunting. But when we cultivate self-compassion, we might find it easier to step into the unknown, right? Acknowledging that mistakes are a natural part of life, they can empower us to take those leaps with greater confidence, right? So it's kind of like if you're not afraid of making mistakes, if you're not going to judge yourself for quote unquote failure, you're going to be more apt to take those risks that maybe would end up with you in a mistake, right? We know that mistakes are just opportunities to learn. And so when we take that perspective, it's a lot easier for us to say, well, let's see what happens, right? Instead of being afraid of what's going to happen. And then finally, it can help us to foster that growth mindset. Again, these are all interconnected, okay? So when we offer ourselves grace and compassion, that can make us feel more resilient and capable to handle setbacks, right? Especially, I know for me, if I go back and think of my, some mistakes that I've made in the past, I always have to remind myself to realize like the growth that came from those mistakes, right? What was the end result? The mistake itself wasn't the end, right? The lesson learned on the other side was, right? And so just reminding myself that mistakes are opportunities for growth. So many people with rigid mindsets, right, where you're not very open-minded or you're just very matter-of-fact about things as far as like, well, I know this is what's going to be outcome, right? You're not open to possibilities. We can struggle to embrace alternative perspectives, right? And we have that fear that being wrong will negatively affect our sense of worth, how other people view us, how we view ourselves. But again, when we meet that with self-compassion, we're more inclined to explore and engage with new perspectives. And again, viewing challenges as opportunity for growth rather than threats to our sense of self, right? We all make mistakes. So nurturing our self-compassion, it's really just kind of like we're laying down a path that leads to that greater understanding and that joy and that fulfillment in our life and our relationships. So we are deserving of kindness, especially from ourselves. Okay, so don't forget that. So how can we practice self-compassion? So I'm going to give you 3 exercises and a meditation before we close today. So number 1 is use soothing, caring self-talk. Okay, we all talk to ourselves, whether we want to admit it or not. But this is just a way for us to be intentional, right? Take some time to be intentional about the words we are saying to ourselves. So when we're in the middle of our caregiving task, it can be really easy to fall into patterns of that negative or critical self-talk, right? And sometimes it's just kind of going on in the background. It's like an ambient loop that's kind of running and we don't even realize we're doing it, right? But you're not alone in feeling overwhelmed or making mistakes, right? That's just part of being human. Again, I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. But the first step towards kindness is recognizing when you're being hard on yourself, okay? So next time you find yourself feeling stressed or feeling doubtful, consider speaking to yourself with that same gentleness and compassion you would offer a dear friend, okay? If you wouldn't say it to a dear friend, you shouldn't say it to yourself, okay? So you could say something like, you're doing your best. It's normal to feel this way, right? This is challenging, but you've gotten through it before, right? Just kind of give you that attaboy, attagirl, what have you. And you could step outside for these moments, right? And express these words out loud. You can place your hand on your heart, and that can be a way to reassure yourself, give you that self-talk or that positive self-talk. And that can help you acknowledge your feelings and bring a sense of healing to your anxiety. Again, using those components of self-compassion, like finding common humanity, right? This is hard for anybody, right? It's okay. Next, write a letter from a loving friend. So this is very similar to that soothing self-talk, but this is going to be a more tangible exercise where you're going to have that in more of a concrete way, right? So writing can be a profound way to connect with your inner self. I know I've kind of joked before where I'm a huge advocate for journaling, even though I don't do it. probably should. But if you find certain feelings or perceptions make you feel less than or inadequate, just take a moment and write them down and just pay attention to what emotions arise, again, with no judgment, okay? And then you just imagine what a loving friend or supporting friend would say, who understands your journey, they understand your history, and all the nuances that make you who you are. This friend cherishes every part of you, including your struggles and your triumphs, okay? So writing a letter, a heartfelt letter from that compassionate friend's perspective can actually comfort you, it can encourage you, it can help you with those self-judgments, okay? And so it might be easier for some of you to do this than others because, you know, writing a letter to yourself from yourself as your own very best friend can seem a little whimsical and strange to some of you. But for others, it might be just exactly what you need, right? Just to have those words, because we all know what we would say to our close friends or our close family members if they were in the same situation, but we very rarely turn those words back onto ourselves. So this is an exercise where you can do just that. And the final exercise I'm going to give you is to take a self-compassion break. Okay. So this is just taking a moment to acknowledge your need for space, right? That's an act of kindness towards yourself, right? If you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, you can just do something very simple like placing your hand on your heart and just take a few moments to ease those feelings with some gentle affirmations. Okay. So you just acknowledge how you're feeling by saying something like, I'm feeling stressed, right? I'm hurting, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed. And just that simple act of recognition can help you connect with your present state, right? And then you remind yourself that you're not alone, right? It's comforting to remember that countless others have faced similar challenges. So you could say things like, I know other people experience this too, right? Everyone encounters tough times. And then finally, just offer yourself a little compassion. So you might find phrases like, may I be safe and strong, helpful. May I embrace my true self, or may I find joy and healing, okay? So remember that practicing self-compassion, that is a very important part. I would say it's probably pretty vital to caring for ourselves, right? And it allows us to extend that kindness again to everyone else around you. So just remember, you're doing important work and you deserve the same love and compassion that you give to other people, okay? You don't have to be a burnt offering, right? You can be a living sacrifice, as the saying goes. So finally, I'm going to leave you with this meta meditation. Now, I have mentioned this before in other trainings. I find it to be incredibly helpful in my own practice because I struggle with self-compassion. I struggle with self-love, and I think we all do, right? Especially when we look around the world and we think, you know, there's so many more people out there, you know, going through things harder than me, or, you know, whatever the case may be. We kind of have those the struggle Olympics, right? Who's got it the worst, and so we feel less inclined or like we don't deserve to turn some of that inward. But I'm just here to encourage you. Yes, you do. You have enough compassion in you to give to other people and to yourself. Okay. So metta meditation is also known as a loving kindness meditation, and this is a very powerful practice that can really transform the experience of family caregivers by fostering that compassion and alleviating stress, which is what we really, really need more of, right? This can encourage a profound connection to yourself and other people, guiding you towards a place of inner peace and resilience. So I'm not going to go through, you know, this whole thing as a meditation, but I'm going to give you like the framework of it, and I encourage you to try it on your own. You can also probably look on YouTube and see videos of people doing the metta meditation or the loving kindness meditation, and it's all very much the same. But you really just begin by generating those feelings of love and kindness towards yourself. So this is a practice that it starts with the self and then ripples out. Okay, if you think about throwing a stone in a pond, right? It starts with you, right? You're the stone in the pond. That's the first ripple. And then all the other ripples is how you expand that kindness out to other people. And so you really just start with yourself and you say, may I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease. Okay, so this is the start. And you just kind of feel the warmth of those wishes, of that heartfelt kindness embrace you, right? Just really imagine that warm light around you. And this might be enough for you to start, right? Just, I really struggle with loving myself. And so I'm going to practice this loving kindness towards myself, and that's it, right? And that's fine. However, the next step is to extend that loving kindness to family or maybe friends that are your chosen family, right? So bring to mind a family member that you care for. This could be the loved one you're caring for. This could be a spouse, a child, a close friend, anybody that you can think of, right? It doesn't have to be anyone in particular, just someone that you care about. And you say the same phrase, except you put their name. So I'll use my husband. My husband's name is Brian. Say, may Brian be happy. May Brian be healthy. May Brian be safe. May Brian live with ease. And for some of you, it may be easier for you to push this kindness out to somebody else, where it was more difficult to keep it to yourself. So just kind of gauge where you are, right? This might be easier for you. And so you just allow that love that you feel for that person to grow, hold them close in your heart, right? Visualize whatever you need to visualize to make this real for you. And then the next step, and again, you might stop at number 2, and that's fine. But if you want to go out even further, you widen your circle and you gradually expand your well wishes to include all family members, all friends, maybe even some of those that might challenge you a little bit, right? And that's going to help to nurture that deep sense of connection and compassion. And so you use the same phrases, right? May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease, but you include another individual's name, or you can say, may my family, may my friends, right? It can be very wide. And then last is embrace the wider community. So ultimately, this is you extending your loving kindness to all beings everywhere, encompassing your community, your country, your world, right? May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy, right? May all beings be safe. May all beings live with ease, okay? So it might seem a little strange to do something like that, but it really does kind of signal to your brain, it kind of triggers to your brain, like, hey, I'm operating off of this compassion now. I'm operating off of this kindness now. And it starts with me, right? So it's really just an exercise to get you used to giving that kindness to yourself first, giving that compassion to yourself first, which I think we often forget to do. We're the last one on the totem pole, right? We're the ones, we're going to give all this love, all this care, all this kindness to everybody else. And then at the end of the day, what's left for you, right? Probably not a lot. So this will encourage you to start with yourself, right? We all know that the instructions on the airplane, put your mask on first before you save somebody else. That's what this is, okay? So some tips, practice this regularly, okay? Even if it's just a few minutes each day, this is gonna be a good practice to get you started, to nurture that deeper sense of peace, to build up that resilience. And that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for sustainability. We're looking for resilience, because your stress, your tasks, all the things that you do, those aren't going anywhere, right? So we have to be able to fortify ourselves, build up that foundation to where we can withstand that stress as best as we can. The next tip, be patient, okay? Allow yourself the grace that you need to embrace this journey as it unfolds over time. Integrate it into daily life. So infuse these meta phrases into your life daily, into your interactions and moments of stress. Just allow your kindness to guide you, okay? So if you mess up, right? Say you goofed somehow, right? And your go-to, your knee-jerk response is, oh, I can't believe we did this again. I'm such a failure. I'm not organized. I can't do this. I'm no good, right? If that's your instant response, that's okay. Catch it, okay? Catch it and replace it with kindness. Catch it and replace it with finding yourself in common humanity, right? Don't berate yourself for making a mistake, because you're a human being, okay? So just let that kindness guide you. So this meditation is a great invitation to cultivate kindness and compassion within ourselves, and it can help to rejuvenate our spirit as we care for other people. And this will enhance our emotional well-being, okay? So I encourage you to try this or any other similar type of meditation that starts with first yourself, then people you're close to, outward, 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 okay? And then eventually just be a big old ball of ripple effect, kindness, love, and people won't be able to stand you. Just kidding. They'll love you forever.
All right, so that is my info for you today. Let me go ahead and pause this recording.